Despite the pandemic and weather, it's nonstop action at the Olympics as fans around the world keep a close eye on some of their favorite athletes and teams. Now, while there are concerns following the increase of COVID-19 in Tokyo, another question is emerging: whether hosting these elaborate events provide any real social economic impact to local communities. Over the years, hosting the Olympics has become incredibly expensive. Some cities say they have found themselves actually overspending. So joining us now to discuss this and more is founder and president of Marga Incorporated, David Maurrasse. David, thank you so much for being here. As we dive in, we obviously know this particular Olympic Games is definitely not like anyone that we have seen before. But that as a given, what makes hosting the Olympics so expensive? And with that, I mean, what kind of local investments do these games require?
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for covering this topic that I think is very important. We really need to think about the importance of these games and how it affects community and economic development locally. And one of the reasons the costs are so high with Olympic Games is because you have multiple significant expenses that are very much associated with being able to secure a bid. For example, the venues, particularly the athletic venues. In many cases, new athletic venues end up getting created in order to host games. We also look at general infrastructure aspects that end up getting created around the games as well. Things related to tourism, things related to transportation and travel. And these are also big events that require a lot of attention and a lot of staffing and a lot of contractors. So there are usually numerous costs associated with the games. And we're at an interesting point where enough cities around the world are starting to question whether or not these costs are worth it. And we are seeing some response from the International Olympic Committee, and particularly around athletic venues, people trying to repurpose existing venues rather than creating new ones.
And I want to dig into that. I wanted to ask this, do you think these Olympic Games, do they actually benefit local populations, particularly low-income areas that arguably need that benefit the most?
Yeah, and this is, I think, one of the most challenging aspects of these games. When we think about benefits, the benefits are often accruing to corporate sponsors. They're going to the businesses, the contractors, the developers. When you think about all the building that goes on. But oftentimes Olympic Games are known just as much for displacing local populations in the areas where Olympic villages are created. Oftentimes local populations are displaced in order to make room for new facilities that are being created. We oftentimes also find situations where Olympic Games leave behind numerous structures that aren't of any particular value to the local community. And then when you think about the expenditure question that we were just addressing, these are significant costs that are essentially covered by taxpayers, and they don't come back to the communities in ways that could really change their standard of living, to address the core bread and butter issues that they're confronting. So cities will say, okay, we want these games because it's an opportunity for great visibility for our city, for our country, for tourism and the like. But there aren't strict enough methods to make sure that those economic benefits, that revenue that comes in, actually is distributed in a way that benefits low-income populations.
Yeah. You noted this earlier, and the International Olympic Committee has also reported that it's seeing fewer bids for the Olympic Games. The latest bid, there was really only one bidder, that one and only one bidder that was in on that. You also noted that the bidding process, there's a lot of criticism around it, and there, potentially is this argument starting to brew that maybe we should have the games in one location and do it that same location every year. Can you touch on both of those points and that latter argument on what that could mean for the sport?
Well, I'm not sure where things are going in terms of one location every year, but I do think it's a good consideration for sure. Of course, we've already got Summer Olympics lined up for Paris in 2024, then Los Angeles 2028, and then Brisbane in 2032. So these are well years in advance, but I do know that the Olympic Committee has been forced to address this cost consideration. And they have been, in some ways, readjusting their level of expectation around athletic venues, around facilities that need to be created, and really allowing cities to be in a position to actually work with existing resources rather than create resources anew just for the Olympics.
Yeah. Lastly, before I let you go here, I've got about 30 seconds. I just want to touch on the Tokyo Olympics specifically. When do you think there will be enough to consider the Olympics this year in Tokyo a success or a failure? And what do you think so far?
Oh, it's very difficult to consider these Olympics a success so far. Obviously, they were forced into a situation where they couldn't have fans in the stands. And then we have mass protest and disagreement with the fact that these Olympics are underway. I do think we always have to give a few years after Olympic Games to assess their level of impact locally, and they deserve that space as well. But I think it's a very challenging situation at this point.
Thank you so much for your insight and the valid points that you bring. This is an argument and a conversation that will probably continue to linger for years on. Thank you so much, founder and president of Marga Incorporated, David Maurrasse.